You know, when you've been a park ranger as long as I have, you start to think you've seen it all. The lost hikers, the bear encounters, the drunken campers. It's all part of the job. But there's one night, one call that I'll never forget. It's the reason I handed in my badge and why I haven't set foot in the woods since. It was late autumn, and the leaves were just starting to turn. That's when we got the call about a missing person, a young man named Ethan who'd gone camping with his friends in the deep woods of the park. They said he'd wandered off in the middle of the night and hadn't returned. Now, this wasn't my first rodeo. I'd conducted plenty of search and rescue operations before. But something about this one felt different from the start. There was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the crisp fall breeze, and the woods seemed quieter than usual, like even the animals knew something was off. We set out at first light, a small team of rangers and volunteers, fanning out through the dense trees. The friends had given us a general idea of where Ethan might have gone, but the more we searched, the more uneasy I became. It was like the forest was playing tricks on us, the trails twisting and turning in ways I swore they never had before. As the day wore on, and the sun began to dip below the trees, that's when I started to hear them. Whispers, just at the edge of my perception. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks, but the longer I listened, the more I realized the whispers were forming words, a language I couldn't quite make out. I radioed my team, but they were spread out too far and the reception was spotty at best. So I pressed on, following the whispers deeper into the heart of the woods. That's when I found it, Ethan's campsite, or what was left of it. The tent was shredded, sleeping bags scattered like confetti, and there, in the center of it all, was Ethan. But he wasn't alone. Crouched over his body was a creature I can only describe as a living nightmare. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed to go on forever. Its skin was pulled tight over a gaunt, skeletal frame, and antlers sprouted from its skull like some twisted crown. But it was the eyes that truly haunted me, deep, sunken pits that glowed with an unearthly hunger. I must have made a sound, because the creature's head snapped up, those burning eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, I knew I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something ancient and evil, the Wendigo. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I was frozen, transfixed by the horror before me. The Wendigo rose to its full height, towering over me, and I could see the blood dripping from its maw, the bits of flesh caught between its needle-like teeth. It took a step towards me, and that's when my survival instinct finally kicked in. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear it behind me, the heavy footfalls, the snapping of twigs. It was toying with me, I realized, like a cat with a mouse. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally stumbled into a clearing, gasping for breath, I realized I was hopelessly lost. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like a vortex of despair. I could make out words, phrases, a chant that seemed to burrow into my mind. Hunger, hunger, never sated, flesh and bone, blood and hatred. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The chant was inside me now, echoing in the depths of my soul. That's when I saw it again, emerging from the trees like a phantom. The Wendigo, its eyes burning with a malevolent glee. It stalked towards me slowly, savoring my terror. I scrambled back, my hand searching desperately for something, anything to defend myself with. My fingers closed around a fallen branch, and I swung it with all my might. The branch connected with the creature's skull with a sickening crack, but it barely seemed to notice. It lunged, its claws tearing into my flesh, and I screamed. Pain unlike anything I'd ever known consumed me, and I could feel my blood, hot and sticky, pouring from the wounds. But even as I lay there, my life ebbing away, I could feel something else, something far more terrifying. A hunger, gnawing at my insides, a craving for flesh and blood and bone. The chant grew louder, pounding in my skull, and I realized with dawning horror that the Wendigo wasn't just killing me, it was transforming me. They found me days later, barely alive, babbling incoherently about monsters in the woods. The official report said Ethan and I were attacked by a bear. But I know the truth. I saw it in the eyes of the rangers who found me, the ones who whispered legends of the Wendigo around campfires late at night. I survived, if you can call it that. But the hunger, it never leaves me. It gnaws at my soul, whispering to me in the dark of night. I see Ethan's face in my dreams, feel his flesh beneath my teeth. I know it's only a matter of time before the Wendigo claims me completely. So I stay away from the woods now, lock myself away and pray for dawn. But I can feel it, always. The pull of the Wendigo, the insatiable hunger. And I fear that one day, the whispers will become too loud to ignore, and I'll find myself back in those cursed woods, no longer the hunter, but the hunted. Or worse, the monster I've tried so hard to escape. I've been a hunter for as long as I can remember, following in the footsteps of my father and his father before him. The wilderness is in my blood, a part of me as much as the air I breathe. I've tracked and taken down every kind of game you can imagine, from the majestic elk of the Rockies to the elusive bighorn sheep of the Sierra Nevada. But there's one hunt, one encounter, that will stay with me until my dying day. It was late winter, and I had ventured deep into the heart of the Minnesota Northwoods, pursuing a particularly cunning wolf that had eluded me for weeks. The landscape was a stark beauty of snow and ice, the trees laden with a heavy frost that glittered beneath the pale sun. I had been tracking the wolf for days, following its prints through the deep drifts and frozen swamps. As night fell, I made camp beneath a towering pine, building a small fire to ward off the bitter cold. I huddled close to the flames, sipping a mug of hot coffee and listening to the eerie silence of the forest. But as the minutes ticked by, I began to feel a strange unease, a prickling at the back of my neck that I couldn't quite shake. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. It was a sound I had heard countless times before, the call of a lone wolf seeking its pack. But there was something different about this howl, something that set my teeth on edge. It was deeper, more guttural, and filled with a hunger that I had never heard before. I rose to my feet, my rifle in hand, scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. And that's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. They were a sickly yellow, tinged with a malevolent red, and filled with a feral intelligence that sent a shiver down my spine. I raised my rifle, my finger hovering over the trigger, but before I could fire, the creature stepped into the light, and my blood ran cold. It was a wolf, but unlike any wolf I had ever seen. Its body was gaunt and emaciated, its fur hanging in ragged clumps from its bony frame. Its legs were unnaturally long, and its paws were tipped with wicked curved claws. But it was the creature's face that truly horrified me. It was almost human, with sunken hollow eyes and a mouth filled with jagged, razor-sharp teeth. And atop its head, a pair of twisted, branching antlers sprouted from its skull, like some sort of nightmarish crown. I knew then that I was looking at something beyond the natural world, something born of darkness and ancient evil. The Wendigo, the demon spirit of the Northwoods, the insatiable hunger that drives men to madness and cannibalism. The creature regarded me with a cold, calculating gaze, its nostrils flaring as it caught my scent. And then, with a speed that defied belief, it lunged, its jaws snapping at my throat. I barely managed to dodge aside, my rifle barking as I fired a desperate shot. The bullet struck the Wendigo in the shoulder, but it barely seemed to notice, its eyes blazing with a hunger that knew no pain. I turned and ran then, crashing through the underbrush in a blind panic. I could hear the creature behind me, its panting breaths and thudding footfalls drawing ever closer. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. But still, the Wendigo pursued me, its hunger driving it forward. I burst from the tree line onto the frozen expanse of a lake, the ice groaning beneath my feet. I could see the lights of a distant cabin on the far shore, a desperate hope of sanctuary. But as I ran, I heard the ice crack and splinter behind me, and I knew the Wendigo was close. I never made it to the cabin. The ice gave way beneath me, and I plunged into the frigid water, the cold stealing the breath from my lungs. I clawed my way back to the surface, gasping and shivering, only to see the Wendigo standing at the edge of the hole, its eyes blazing with triumph. It reached for me then, its claws sinking into my flesh as it dragged me from the water. I screamed, but there was no one to hear me, no one to save me from the demon's hunger. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the Wendigo's maw, its teeth sinking into my throat. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body broken and my mind shattered. They told me I had been found on the shore of the lake, half frozen and delirious, babbling about monsters in the woods. But I know the truth. I know what I saw out there in the wilderness. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, to the untamed beauty of nature. As a photographer, I've spent countless hours exploring the dense forests and rugged landscapes of the Pacific Northwest, capturing the essence of the wild through my lens. But there's one trip, one fateful expedition that haunts me to this day. It was late autumn, and I had set out to photograph the ancient forests of the Olympic Peninsula. I had heard whispers of a remote, seldom visited region deep within the heart of the wilderness, a place where the trees towered like silent guardians and the mist clung to the earth like a shroud. It was said to be a place of unspoiled beauty, untouched by the modern world. I knew I had to see it for myself. I set out at dawn, my camera gear strapped to my back, a map and compass my only guides. The forest seemed to swallow me whole as I ventured deeper, the canopy above growing thicker with each step. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the occasional cry of a distant bird. As the day wore on, I found myself in a part of the forest I had never seen before. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled trunks twisted and scarred with age. The undergrowth was dense and tangled, making progress slow and arduous. But there was something else, something that set my nerves on edge. A feeling of being watched, of eyes upon me from the shadows. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as I pressed on, the feeling grew stronger. I could hear whispers on the wind, a language I couldn't understand. And then I saw it, a flash of movement in the periphery of my vision. Something large and fast darting between the trees. My heart raced as I spun around trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of forest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. And that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. I had heard stories of the creatures that lurked in these woods, legends passed down by the indigenous tribes of the region. Tales of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that possessed the bodies of men and turned them into ravenous, insatiable beasts. But I had always dismissed them as mere folklore, the stuff of campfire stories and Hollywood horror films. Now, standing there in the heart of the wilderness, I wasn't so sure. The growl came again, closer this time, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I reached for my camera, thinking to capture whatever it was on film, but as I raised the viewfinder to my eye, I saw it. It was a creature out of nightmare, a twisted, emaciated thing that seemed to be all limbs and teeth. Its body was covered in matted fur, and its eyes glowed with a feral, hungry light. It crouched on the branch of a nearby tree, watching me with a predatory intensity. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I knew I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that defied the laws of nature. And then it spoke, its voice a rasping, inhuman whisper that filled my mind and soul with dread. "Hungry," it said, drawing out the word into a hiss. "So very hungry." I ran then, crashing through the underbrush in a blind panic. I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footfalls and guttural breathing drawing ever closer. Branches tore at my skin and clothing, but I didn't care. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between myself and the thing that pursued me. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I burst from the tree line onto a lonely stretch of highway. I flagged down a passing motorist, babbling incoherently about monsters in the woods. They took me to the nearest town, where I spent the night in a cheap motel, trembling and jumping at every sound. I never went back to those woods, never picked up a camera again. The memory of what I saw, what I heard, haunts me still. I know now that the legends are true, that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that hunger for the flesh and blood of the living. The Wendigo is out there waiting in the shadows of the forest, and God help anyone who crosses its path.